on today's episode of the VROOM podcast.
We're talking about racing tires.
From the early days to the tire wars.
We're talking about the success, the failures, as well as the evolution of one of the most crucial aspects of racing.
So stay tuned because this will be gripping.
Whoa!
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 9 of the VROOM podcast. As always, I'm your host, Wills Jones, along with my wonderful co-host, Simon Martell.
All right, right off the bat, I just want to say that I really appreciate puns. And that pun, gripping, really good, really convenient, very thematic.
I worked real hard on that one.
And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, it's thematic because today we're talking about tires. And the most important part of tires is that they grip.
This is true.
So how we're seeing today's episode go about is we kind of want to, shine a light on maybe a more occult, more mysterious aspect of the sport for people who like start watching F1. At least I know for me, it took me, like a season or two before I even started to care about tires. Like you look at the engine, you look at the aerodynamics. Oh, it's going fast. But then you start thinking, oh, like the whole point of the strategy and how there's undercuts, overcuts, like how there's a huge position change. It's all centered around how tires wear out. And so today's episode is focused on the tire because it makes such a huge difference in today's world, in F1's racing.
And really, like in any type of racing, like you see in we'll get into this in categories where they have, still tire wars. It is so key to know what type of tire your vehicle works best on. And it like oftentimes as well, like what type of tire you're running affects how you've tuned your suspension and like other aspects of the car to complement the tire.
Yeah. And that's like a huge point because as we see as well throughout the years, now cars are being developed around the tires. Like it's not the other way around. It's not even like a teamwork. It's people are get given a certain type of tire, and now they have to design a car to perform to the maximum with that exact tire. So it's kind of why it's so important in racing, and you can see it makes a huge difference throughout races. So some cars are designed in ways that all of a sudden their front tires warm up faster than their rear, or the inverse. They have a very quick wear on their tires. And it makes a really big difference on the overall performance of a racing car.
Yeah. So I think we'll just get into sort of the overall of, Formula One tires to start off with and somewhat racing tires in general, because almost every major racing series, unless it's off-road, uses slick tires.
Yeah. And so I think that's a great place to start off with. Right now in F1, Pirelli is the only tire supplier. It used to be different, and we'll talk about that later on in the episode. But nowadays, they're the only one that are supplying tires to the F1 racing teams, and they produce 3 different types of tires overall. When all is said and done, they produce slick tires, which are tires that have no thread on them. It's just straight rubber. It's intended for maximum exposition to the road, maximum like surface creepiness. So every part of the tire is supposed to touch the road and give a grip for a racing car. Then you have 2 different types of tires, which are more used when it's wet, because as we see a lot is slick tires, because they have no thread. If all of a sudden it gets wet, there's puddles, those tires are going to be very good at aquaplaning and losing control. And so 2 different types of tires exist to solve that problem. You have intermediate tires, which have a intermediate amount of threads. So they have some threads in the tire to remove the water, to evacuate the water, to try to keep as much contact to the surface. And then you have extreme tires, which are tires that look like off-road tires, especially on F1 cars. They're pretty crazy to see. And those have the maximum amount of threads. They're there to try to remove as much as water as possible under the car when the tires are spinning.
Yeah, and the contact patches for the tires, like you'll see on the intermediates, it's a pretty thin tire thread where there's not much change between the contact patch of the tire and then where that thread goes in, where
Yeah,
on
like the depth of the groove,
yeah,
basically. Yeah.
on those slick tires, it is a deep thread.
Yeah, you mean on the extreme. So
Yeah,
you said
on the
like, yeah,
extreme
exactly,
wet.
on the extreme, just so we don't mix up our viewers. And so that's kind of what is right now in the sport, or those three different type of tires. The ones that most people recognize as racing tires, the one we see on F1 the most, are the slicks, because usually F1 races happen in sunny, nice weather, and the slicks are then the one that they're trying to use the most. So this kind of leads us to the different part of our tire summary before we move on to the history, and that's kind of why there is different types of tires. So we talked about slick, then we talk about intermediate and extreme, which have just difference in their thread. But then in slick themselves, there's a lot of difference between different types of slicks. Do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between hard, medium, and soft tires?
Yeah, so basically it's somewhat self-explanatory to the compound of rubber used. So the hard tires will have the hardest, stiffest compound of rubber, meaning that they don't heat up quite as quickly and they don't wear as much. So these tires, they last longer, but they're slightly less grippy. And we touched on that in the other podcast with why some teams didn't go for the hard tires right off the line. And that's just down to the acceleration and the time it would take to heat up those tires. You then have the mediums, which are the sort of perfect in between of the soft and the hard. They'll heat up pretty quickly, but they'll also, they'll degrade faster than those hard tires would. And then the soft tires are usually good for 6-7 laps, and then they're, as they're done and dusted, because they heat up really quickly. They'll give you a ton of grip right away, but you get through those tires very fast.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great summary of kind of the difference between those slick tires. At the end of the day, just to give a one phraser, this as you move from a harder to a softer tire, you get better grip, but you lose durability. So from the softer to the harder tire, you get a higher durability. And so it's all about the balance between how long you want your tires to last to how much grip you want. And so that's kind of when we talk about strategy in the F1, especially with tire degradation. Well, we're talking about, okay, how much do you think you can make last your tires? Your durability of those tires, for how much grip you need to stay competitive and pass people during an F1 race.
Yeah,
So yeah, there you go.
The brief overview of tires. That's
Yeah,
that.
brief overview, and then I think as well we can talk about kind of a quick history. There's a lot out there. I was researching this week about tire history, kind of got into a click hole. I imagine most of you have done this before, where you go from one Wikipedia page to the other and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out why you're on a completely different topic. But I did learn a lot about F1 racing tires, and not just F1, sorry, but just racing tires in general. So for a while, especially at the start of just the automobile history of the start of cars, they used all the same tires. It was just a round kind of thing to make cars like move around. And the first year that you saw racing specific tires was a special year. I'm just wondering, Wills, I'm going to quiz you here. Hopefully you don't see it in front of your screen. Otherwise, try to guess. But what year do you think the first tires ever for racing were introduced?
I'm going to tell you, I have looked at the screen, but if you asked me this before, I would have said like 1950 easily.
Yeah. Okay. So you're imagining like when you get into muscle car, that real power, right?
Yeah, the real like powerful beefy cars when they started to get properly big and like land yachts is when I would assume that racing tires became fully necessary.
Yeah. So actually, the first racing specific tire ever developed by Dunlop was the 5-stud pattern in 1934. And hopefully we can show a picture or just to give you an idea of what it was. It was a very skinny tire, but with a specific thread that made it perform better as a racing tire than just an overall long distance tire. And so from 1934, there was a lot of evolutions over the next 20 years. Not necessarily a lot of evolution like quickly, but tires had change in form, change in size, and slowly started to differentiate themselves from their road going counterpart. Initially, those tires were made of cotton and real tree rubber, like the ones that they would collect in the Congo and Africa. So the real rubber that comes from trees. And those used to weigh a lot. There were about 38 pounds per tire. And if there's one thing you should know about racing is that you want to reduce the unsprung weight. Do you want to talk a little bit about unsprung weight, Wills?
I will let you handle unsprung weight as that is a term I have never heard until just now.
Oh, well, that's perfect. All right. Well, unsprung weight is the term when you talk about weight that isn't attached to a spring. So unsprung. If you think about a car, the engine, the driver himself, the suspension. Well, suspension doesn't really count, but the windshield, the doors, all of that weight isn't directly connected to the ground. It goes through spring, and so that weight can be, that can be a more. I'm about to say. It can be reduced, like the movement can be reduced by springs. It can be
The way it's
controlled a lot.
distributed around
Yeah,
the car
exactly. It
can
can
be
be controlled a
modified.
lot with springs and suspension. Unsprung weight is something that's out of your control. So those are the tires, the rims, the mags, those things. If you hit a pothole, if you go up, you go down, you jump, that those don't have a control over because they're the direct contact to your to the road. And so you want to reduce that weight as much as possible because as heavier that weight is, since you can't control it, you don't have any control over it, it negatively affects the performance of your car. And so all of that detour to just say that initially in the early times the tires were really heavy, and over the years you see that most of the evolution either aims towards better contact on the ground or reducing weight. So this kind of leads me to maybe the next breakthrough in 1958. So 1958, we're not even at like muscle car yet. We're not at the pony era. 1958 are the big lanyard. Like you said maybe earlier, you can think about those kind of almost mafia cars. Is what I have in mind. And the big breakthrough was nylon fabric in the tires. So that reduced weight by 12 pounds per tire. So you have a tire that weighs 40 pounds about, and you can reduce it by 25% right away by changing how you make it. That's a huge breakthrough.
It's a huge weight
Yeah,
weight
saving.
reduction gain.
Yeah, exactly.
To use that terminology there.
So Dunlop was kind of the first one of the first manufacturers in the F1 scene. There were some Italians manufacturers. There was a couple different ones, and then you see that big American tire manufacturers entered the F1 scene around that time, around the 60s. So Goodyear and Firestone, big players with the American market, try to enter F1, and soon they kind of figure out that they're trailing behind Dunlop. They don't have the same technology. NASCAR as well as F1 cars do not perform in the world. It's not the same type of tire. And so that's when the technology, the progress, the technology has to start increasing for those tire manufacturers to be able to be competitive. Next big upgrade, I think, would be 1966. Probably one of the biggest thing ever, especially relevant to now, but the first slick tire. So when we're talking about tires, that first slick, so the dry weather, maybe so less tread, very wide. It's first introduced in 1966 by Dunlop. At that time, though, it was ahead of its time. It was not a good tire, even though eventually in time, the technology and everything showed it as being better and being the right kind of mindset for racing tires. It wasn't a success at that time because the compound technology just wasn't there yet. You know, ahead of your time. That's exactly what it was. The tire wasn't flexible enough, and so you would feel like you would drive a truck with those tires because it was so stiff. You couldn't feel like how the tire would progress because it was so stiff that you couldn't feel flex, you couldn't feel the degradation. And so the slick tire was introduced, but what didn't get adoption until much later in F1.
I find that
Finally,
interesting
yeah,
because you would think like as long as you have like a big contact patch with the road and you're able to put all of the power down through the rubber of the tire, that it would be, overall sort of more efficient. So that I am surprised that the first slick tires were not desirable.
no, exactly. And I'm trying to think about maybe an example to make maybe help you visualize it. But if you think about those slow-mos in like Monaco of cars hitting the curb, you can actually see those tires vibrate. I don't know if you have that image in your mind, but you can see the vibration, you can see it flex. Think about if it was just a brick, it was just hard as a rock. When drivers say they feel their car, well, that was the problem. They couldn't feel their car. They couldn't feel the road. They didn't feel as they got onto the curb. And so I think that's why it wasn't a good adoption, was because even then the drivers didn't want to drive them. They felt it impacted their driving.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And so towards the late 60s, you see that those American tire manufacturers finally catch up. Goodyear, Firestone have innovation like the press contour molding, so they're changing the way tires are even made. They reduce the aspect ratio. They introduce tubeless construction, which is how all tires exist now, which is another technology that helps reduce weight even more. And
And
finally,
and if you think about most bike tires are tubed tires, so that's you have like a big inner tube inside your tire, and then that's what holds the air in. So I could definitely see how when you're able to get rid of that, you can feel much more of what's going on with the car. It's one less layer of buffering before the car is really communicating with you.
yeah, exactly. And then just think about about bike tire as well, since I feel hopefully most people have changed a bike tire, at least have seen it. Just imagine, it's so much material. It's a whole bladder that goes around your tire. You just remove it and replace by air. Like, of course, you're gonna just save so much weight. So that was definitely a big innovation, and it guided tire development for the future because now all tires are tubeless. In 69, Dunlop leaves F1, citing the lack of relevance to the road tire development. And that's something we'll hear more than once of tire manufacturers getting to the game and then leaving again. It happens now as well with engine manufacturer. It's so expensive to develop completely new technology, completely different tires, just for a sport of 20 cars. Getting a whole team about that just sometimes isn't worth it for a manufacturer. And so that's what you see in 69. Dunlop leaves, but as we'll see as well later on, there's still more manufacturers that want to be there. They want to have their name out. They want to be the name that has winner all over it. And so yeah, and so all of this to say that at this point we see that the tires have been changing. The technology has been moving so fast that tire manufacturers now say that they're not even relevant with the road tire counterpart, and so they're separate and they're going two completely different paths.
And I feel like part of that would be um like just the way the tires have to heat up and perform is so completely different to the way a road tire has to perform, you know?
Yeah, it's like
They're
the
they're
road
under
tires, they're trying to get as many kilometers out of it as possible because that's an expensive purchase.
yeah, and it, like you want them to last. You want to be able to use those for, years, where a race tire, you want to change that every race because you need the most grip possible. So it's definitely, the I can see how the lack of relevance to road tires comes in. If, maybe some people are unsure, well, if, they're putting the highest loads and highest speed on these tires, why isn't it relevant to road cars? And it's just because the way the car interacts with the tire and the tire interacts with the road is so extremely different to regular road car use.
Yeah, exactly. And you can just think about maybe like, the demand on those tires. It's exactly like you said, it's just so different. One car is going 350 kph for over 2 hours in a row, and the other car is probably never gonna hit 120 if it's a grandpa driving for like 10 years. And so it's crazy. They're just completely different animals. I think the next part we can move on is the radial construction. So it's just a different type of way to build those tires. Pioneered by Pirelli, Michelin. In 79, Michelin introduced those radial slicks. So that new construction for a tire. In F1, they win their race. 6 years later. So they come in 79, introduce a new tire. 6 years later, they leave. And and so for that 6 years of them performing with those new tires, they won over 50% of the races. But like I was saying, just development costs, the fact that it's so different from road tires, it just takes a change in the executive team over at the companies that to just say, like, let's cut this expense, let's focus on something else. And so even though they were very successful, they left F1. And finally, the fact that they were so successful kind of forced other teams other tire manufacturers to follow along. And so Goodyear started producing their radial slick as well. Pirelli introduced their slicks into F2 and then entered F1 several years later, and they're now the tire manufacturer. So they stuck around pretty long. And that's another story that you see a lot is back then the tire constructors introducing a new tire, getting into the sport slowly by going through F2 first, and then moving on to the big dogs in F1.
And like that was back when, like teams could choose what tires they ran, and it provided an opportunity for the tire company to prove, like, look, our tires work well on the one car level below you, so let's put them on your car and see how well they can work.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then I
Very,
think we
very
could,
much like drivers coming up.
yeah. um, I think we can kind of move on now to the 90s and kind of an exciting era about all those manufacturer of tires and the way they were trying to show off what they could do.
Yeah, so the 90s and sort of forward to present day has a very interesting relationship with tires and multiple tire manufacturers versus sole tire manufacturers. So it somewhat seemed like, Formula One and the FIA were open through, the 90s and into the 2000s, pretty much till 2010, to be open to multiple tire suppliers coming into the sport. You see in 1989, F1 was using Bridgestone and Goodyear tires. Now, the following season, in 1999, Goodyear pulled out of the sport, relating to lack of relevant development for like the usual grooved road tires, because it's just no car on the road is going to use slicks, and they're also illegal to put on the car in most countries. I don't know if there is a country where you can drive around on pure slick tires.
So they really did just join F1 for one season, put all that money and left.
Yeah, and I think too, like you, Goodyear has continued supplying NASCAR with tires. So I would imagine there was also somewhat of just an also lack of relevant market for them to sort of advertise these tires to. It I know anytime I see a car with white wall Goodyears on, I'm like, that's a NASCAR tire. I'm not like, oh yeah, like that's a racing tire. Where if I were to see a car with white wall Pirellis, I would think racing tire, not Formula One, because they
Man,
do
those
they do
those
supply
white
other
wall
other
looks so
motorsport.
good.
White wall tires look so sexy.
On a muscle car, it's the must. You gotta put him on it. Yeah, it's so good. So what happened then? If tire manufacturers were leaving F1 because they were just saying it was so different from racing, did FIA do anything about it?
So yeah, what the FIA did to sort of try and bring back in some new tire manufacturers and increase the sort of even relevance of F1 to road cars is that they mandated any tires be built need to have 4 grooves in them. So these aren't like the squiggly grooves that we see in regular cars. Were just 4 straight lines on the tire. Um, so if you look back to cars from the 90s, I think up to 2005, I want to say they were using these straight line tires just with the groove in them. Um, so the companies using then were Michelin and Bridgestone were both in for the 99 season up to 2005. In 2005, tire changes were completely banned. So that meant that teams had to run on the same set of tire throughout the whole race, which meant the tires had to be a lot harder, a lot more rigid construction so that they could last throughout the race. Like we said earlier, with the hard tires will last the longest, but you know, perform a little bit more sloppy. That's what they were trying to get out of these tires. And with the grooving in them, it does make it easier to generate a little bit more heat into those tires. The car will wiggle around a bit more. So the introduction of the groove tires was also so that there was more of an emphasis put on driver ability and less just on the pure grip that the tires were able to provide.
I kind of like the idea of saying that. I feel like it kind of reduced the fun, right? You want the faster cars, the max performance, but I can see that if you're a lower level driver and you're actually not able to, make your tires last as long, you kind of get shafted. So I think that's very interesting aspect. But do you know what really is my favorite part about that rule in '05 of no tire change?
Tell me, Simon.
It's those clips where you see the 20-man pit wall crew just standing around not doing anything because there's no tires to change. And the car comes in. I think refueling was illegal at that point, or was mandatory. So there's one guy refueling the car, but there is 20 guys just dressed up,
Just checking
standing
it
around,
out.
just
Our
looking.
car looks good today, doesn't it?
Just standing there.
Just here for the show.
Man,
Best tickets in the house.
just easy money. I'm getting paid to put on an outfit. Yeah,
Now
I'm glad pit stops are a thing again.
yeah. Now in 2006, tire changes were brought back because of the 2005 US Grand Prix. Now,
Shit show alert.
If anybody listening or watching this podcast doesn't know about the absolute debacle of the 2005 US Grand Prix, let me educate you just a little bit. So the Goodyear Goodyear Tire Suppliers Tire Company did not test at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that year, which
Genius.
kind of blows my mind because it's
Yeah.
Goodyear.
It's
Like
also like
they
you
really
get the
should have.
contract, right? You get a contract with F1. I would imagine you'd do something like
Yeah.
yeah.
So they didn't test there. There was also modifications made to the track that year with a new type of grooving on the high banking. So two of the cars that weekend that were running Goodyears suffered huge blowouts going around that corner, resulting in all the teams running Goodyears that season to say, "Hey, we're not doing this race. Our tires aren't safe enough." And I'm pretty sure Goodyear let them know, like, you guys probably should sit this one out.
Yeah,
So
it's
it
even better than that. Goodyear actually came into the F1 directors, I think, and they're like, look, we can like overnight ship some tires directly from the factory. And so they did that. And then the day after they went out running again and they had another blowout and they were just like, okay, well, we don't
we
know.
tried.
Yeah, like that was our best try. So we're just gonna say like good luck. And then what they said as well was like, well, we suggest you change the track so that cars don't go as fast. So like put a chicane there or actually make them like have a speed limit. And if
A
they go
mandatory
over,
slowdown zone.
if they go over, you penalize them. And then the director was like, no. And because and it's a good point, like how unfair would that be for teams that are not running those tires and that don't have that problem, and all of a sudden you get told that like, oh yeah, you have a speed limit. And I think that's even the best part. I messed up the story. They actually wanted to enforce the speed limit only to the teams that were running those tires and not the teams that had no problem. So could you imagine in the middle of a race,
That
just
would cause such big problems
the
too. Like,
front leader just like, oh, now's the speed limit zone, and just drops 30 Ks like
that
oh,
would
school
be
zone, school zone.
awful.
Yeah. And so they just and so directly for yeah so directly from Goodyear, they just said to the teams like, yeah, I don't think it's very safe. And then all the teams just said like, yeah, we're not running. This is not going to be okay for our teams. So there you go. Sorry to you can finish up the story, but I just wanted to say
Yeah.
like, yeah, Goodyear just went to talk to the directors and try to spin it to help their own team.
So that resulted in a 6-car, 3-team race, which, I mean, I kind of want to like try and find that race on YouTube somewhere, because it's got to be like somewhat entertaining to watch, because it was the Ferraris were running Bridgestones, and they obviously Ferrari is the fastest car of the season and just must have absolutely blown the other two teams out of the water.
My favorite part is there's a picture out there of the start of that Grand Prix, and you see like Ferrari, and I know it was Michael Schumacher. I don't remember his teammate that year, but they're both on like 1-2, like pole. And then there's another team like maybe 4 and 5. And there's a team like P15, P16, and there's just this empty space of like the teams that didn't show up to race, and it's just hilarious. There's just like, oh, okay, like there's just those losers in the back that kind of got included because they had the right tires, but like, yeah, they're not racing.
Well, and like, would you not try and petition to be like, hey, like, can we not start a little closer up?
Yeah, like let's just give them let's just give every other team like a grid penalty, please. Like
And so in 2007, to carry on a little bit here with the tire history, Bridgestone became the sole provider for tires in Formula One. And this introduced sort of when they decided that they would allow teams to run different compounds of their tire. So they introduced two tire compounds: the prime tire that lasted longer but had less grip, and the option tire that had more grip but degraded faster. So you would, if you listen to races from the late 2000s, you'll hear them talking about the prime tire versus the option tire. And that's pretty much just soft versus hard in sort of today's tire understanding.
But at that time, they still had threads, right? They weren't back to slicks.
Um, in '07, I believe they were back to slicks.
Um, I think that was kind of a trick question because the answer, I'm pretty sure they were back in '09 to slicks. So in '07 they had those like ridges, and as I went through that click hole, that was one of my favorite parts to see is that how we're used to seeing the like collar tire now on the sidewall. Well, back then they put actually the tires in those ridges, and so you have the prime tire and the
I'm looking at a
uh,
picture of it now. It looks so
yeah,
silly.
yeah,
The
okay,
prime and
exactly.
the option. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the picture in front of you, but it's very funny because it's the threads themselves that are painted like white, and I don't remember the other color, but
It was
it looks
white and
weird.
green.
It
Yeah.
looks very strange.
It looks like the tires are dirty.
Yeah, it just looks like a Chinese knockoff. That's how it looks to me.
Honestly.
Like especially the white and the threads. It's like, oh yeah, they just like went in with like there's a child laborer in the back just painting like covering up covering up the cheap.
Yeah, and so the painted tires were introduced because the other teams weren't able to tell what other teams were running on. So it was harder to tell what other strategies teams were going for. So, it was back then you could slap a new set of tires on at the start of the race. So you would look over to your competitor in the pit box beside you and you go, I have no clue what tires he's on. I know what tires I'm on, but like he might completely jump me off the start because he's on the options and I'm on the primes. Which
I kind
also
of
I
like
find
that. I was gonna say I kind of like that. It seems like that's what you should have on it. It's just like, oh well, we're gonna see who shows up where, and we'll see the strategy works out or not.
it would be kind of interesting. Let us all know after the race who started on what and changed to what.
Just full blind, like yeah, no, even better. You give the teams the tire without telling them the compound. Yeah, let the drivers figure it out. Yep, good luck.
That'd be glorious.
Man, I could just see Hamilton having like hard tires and just be like, Toto, my tires are gone after like 2 laps.
Bono! So here I have it in my notes, even when they reintroduced slick tires. I don't remember shit well. So in 2009, they brought back full slick tires combined with new aero rules to make the cars rely more on the mechanical grip and to make passing easier. So, part of the issue on those groove tires was that it's harder for you to control lateral motion when you're trying to go for a pass. There's more chance that the back end will step out or you'll understeer a little bit and could go into the back of the driver in front of you or oversteer and slam into the wall. So then in 2011, and those were on Bridgestone tires still. So in 2011, Pirelli became the sole tire provider for F1, were the tire supplier for the World Rally Championship and Grand Am Rolex Sports Car Series, which is the North American sort of GT series. And then after 2011, Rally and sports car changed to Michelin tires and Continental tires, respectively. Just if
Wait,
you're
so
curious on.
was there just like a dance around? Then Pirelli just ditched those series to go to F1.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the FIA controls most of the rally, so I would imagine FIA made that switch, but then I would imagine that Pirelli sort of told the Grand Am sports car series like, hey guys, we got bigger fish to fry now.
Yeah, sorry.
Especially being an Italian company, we wanted the speed.
We racing for Ferrari, not the dirty American.
Exactly. So GP2, which is now F2, started using the identical tires in 2011 as they do in Formula One. So just
They
making
still
it
do
so,
that, right?
yeah, so it's less of a shock to F2 drivers coming in as to sort of what the tires are doing. It gives sort of one less variable of, oh shit, I'm in a way faster car. Because you hear pretty much all the rookies say, yeah, there's nothing that carries over from F2 to F1. Now with Pirelli solely, don't have to worry about any more tire suppliers changing around. There were modifications made to the sidewall markings just to make it easier to tell what tires everybody was running on. Before, they were just a little tiny dot on the tire of, the hard, soft, medium compounds to sort of let the team know what it was, but there was no real visual identification on TV of what those tires were. So that's when we see the introduction of the big stripes along the outside of the tire with the Pirelli P0 logo, all with the nice colors on them.
Man, those are iconic. I think we can talk a bit later on about what's coming in 2022, but man, those sidewalls like colors are so iconic to me. Like this is like one of the really like important aspect of F1 and what makes F1 different.
Yeah, I love seeing the different sidewall colors, and I think it even too, like, it looks so good in a race when you're able to see like a bunch of different cars go by. Yeah, they're all on the same make of tire, but you can easily tell which one's different, and it also kind of affects how good the cars look as well.
Yeah,
Like
100%
some
agree.
cars look way better on the softs. I don't think any car really looks good on the yellow mediums. It's a pretty standard. That's sort of what they show all the cars in when they show them. But God,
Man,
that AlphaTauri looks
yeah,
so good.
exactly
with
what I
the
was gonna
white
say.
tires.
Oh my God, yeah, we were thinking the same way. That white AlphaTauri with the looks so good.
So good.
Yeah. So I guess then what happened? Okay, so in 2016 they introduced 3 compounds for teams. So yeah, like you're saying, what are the colors? White, yellow, and then red, right?
White, yellow, and red. Yes.
I don't think the
So
red with Ferrari works as well as the white with AlphaTauri.
no, well, it's not really the same shade of red. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a burgundy red. And
Yeah, let's get this special
Ferrari
edition.
needs to be Ferrari needs to be a bright red. Man, the Ferrari should just have different shades of red for all their cars.
Could you imagine if they like switched every race? They switched it by like one shade, and like it would take like 5 races until somebody noticed.
Hey, you guys' tires are a different color than everybody else's.
Hey, I don't get it. Like the car looks really different to the poster that you had at the start of the season. What's up with that?
So yeah, in 2016, they offered the full 3 compounds of hard, medium, soft, with teams having the option to run 2 of the compounds throughout the race. So that's still how it is now. You'll see most teams go for a one-stop strategy, which means they'll use 2 compounds. And if they go for a 3-stop, they're still going to use 2 compounds and just go on one of those compounds twice. They also get 13 sets of each compound of tire. So that's a lot of tires being used. I don't know what 13 times 4 is. Those numbers are too big for me.
But that's crazy. There's actually just there's only 13 sets. That means like I don't know. When I started following the sports, I literally thought there was just a pile of tire in the back and they just went and grabbed them whenever they wanted. And then when I learned that they actually had to like think about how they use their sets, like 13 is a lot, but it still impacts like racing now. Like depending on what teams uses what type of tires during practice and stuff, it can it'll actually impact like what their strategy for the race 2 days later is.
Yeah, and you'll see like it's talked about a lot, like um when the tires degrade, they go through this sort of sloshy, okay, these tires aren't working, and then they will gradually come back to you and provide you with a little bit more grip. So you'll see teams being able to, kind of scrub the tires a bit and maybe make them um a little bit worn, so that when they get into the race, potentially those tires will heat up faster because the rubber's already been, loosened up on them a little bit. So it definitely adds like some pretty interesting strategy in, if you have drivers that are really good at managing tires. Like, I think we all know Lewis Hamilton is one of the best drivers for tire management on the grid, which is part of why he is a 7-time world champion now. Um, so he has that sort of ability. He sort of knows what his tires are doing at all times. And so it's one of those, you can sort of improve the way your tires work if you know how to scrub them properly, and your team understands the degradation that'll go on with those tires with so many sets. So in 2017, Pirelli made the tires wider and stronger for both Formula One, or for Formula One, where F2 continued to use the old sort of slimmer and less strong, less robust spec tire, just purely because those cars are slower. They don't put down the same loads that the Formula One cars do. So, they don't need as much
I don't
girth to
believe it.
them.
No, Pirelli just had a stack pile, and they're just like, "Fuck, we got to get rid of these." So let's get them to the F2 for the next season.
um, so then in 2018, somebody at Pirelli had a bad idea, I think. They expanded their tire line to 7 tire compounds.
That's a lot of colors. They'd be happy for the month of June. Every team has to have a different color at the start of the race.
Yeah, so what they had, the sort of main introduction was the hyper soft and the super soft tire. So, and this was sort of, you saw a lot of teams just ended up running either soft, hyper soft, or super soft tires, and they never touched those harder compounds. And I think Pirelli kind of realized that wow, okay, like we have teams that just are never using, a fair amount of sets of tires, and they're being carried over race after race after race, and we're still making new ones in the off chance that they do use them. So you saw in 2019, Pirelli dropped the number of tire compounds from 7 down to 5, and only allocating 3 compounds per weekend, which are then marked by the soft, medium, or hard. So you'll hear the commentators talk about the C1, C2, C3, C4, C5 compounds, and then them being marked as either soft, medium, or hard. And there are some weekends where the C3 will be the hard tire, but other weekends where the C3 will be the soft tire. And so that's just the sort of determination of what tires perform best on this track and what 3 are we going to let you use that weekend, which I think is pretty interesting.
To be honest here, I learned this like, I don't know, 12 hours ago. I didn't know that was a thing. That's like, that blew my mind. I really thought there was only like 3 tires, and teams were just like, all right, good luck. Like, but no, that's crazy. How does the Pirelli even decide like what compound to paint for that weekend? I imagine it's just like racing data from past years.
Yeah, so it all depends on, the type of track. If there's, a lot of long open corners where you're not doing, hard braking and fast turning, they'll go to the harder compound tires. They'll be able to last longer. Where at tracks like Baku and Monaco, you'll see them sort of go to their softer set of compounds. So even the hard tires at Baku were not the hardest tires on display for Formula One.
Yeah, okay, I see that. But I imagine like we saw at Baku, that means Pirelli sometimes like make a mistake. Like it didn't see, maybe it didn't look like their tires was the most suitable with the two incident that happened.
Yeah, like realistically, I think they probably could have gone a compound up for each tire, and it probably would have lessened the chance of those tire blowouts.
Okay, yeah, I see.
So now, do we want to talk briefly about the tire blowouts at Baku?
Man, what a great transition.
I
Yes.
I have done some digging and found out what Pirelli have said caused these blowouts.
Wait, are you telling me that Pirelli, who were responsible for the tires for that race and the tires that blew up, well, the same people who offered, design, and presented those tires were the one who had to investigate themselves? How
Yes.
convenient.
so
Let me
Pirelli,
guess, it's not their fault.
That's pretty much what they're saying. They're blaming it all on the teams. So they've said debris did not cause the tire failures, but it also was not a structural issue with the tires. All the tires were structurally sound. What Pirelli says the issue is that teams are running their tires during the race below the tire pressure specs that they provide. So
don't tell me there's a deflate gate now in F1. Oh
yes,
no. Oh no.
So what they claim has happened is that their testing for tire pressures is done before the race and in almost ideal conditions. So you can take the tires out of their tire blankets, and I think it's like 5 minutes later, Pirelli will come by and test the pressures, and if they're all good, cool, they're all good. Hose those tires, like do whatever you can to make those tires lose a bit of pressure. Cool them off a bit, make them a little bit saggier so that air pressure is lessened, and then they go out and race. So what Pirelli say has happened is that basically they aren't testing the tires after the race either, and have obviously no real way of testing during the race. So they think that teams are running tires during the race that aren't meeting the Pirelli safety standards.
That's hilarious. Like, honestly, I want to know the answer, but the fact that they just removed the entire blame off their shoulder is just very convenient.
It's very similar to the Red Bull rear wing issue, where it passes all the tests in the pit lane, but they get out on track and that can't be legal.
Yeah, so I hope whoever find that interesting, you guys should listen to our podcast 2 weeks ago, was it? Where we talked about cheating and how people get around the rules in motorsports. And I thought it was a very interesting podcast. You definitely should check it out. But that's just what it is again, is that there's some rules, there's some testing in place, and people find ways to go around it. Oh, how come
it's all about finding the loopholes to improve your performance. All about exactly. The loopholes. Yeah, so they're going to introduce new testing guidelines this weekend at Paul Ricard. They're going to test the tires after the race to make sure that everybody is up to snuff on what their tires should be doing, which I'm honestly surprised that the tires weren't tested after the race as well either.
Yeah, they test so many things with the parc fermé and everything. I agree. That's very strange.
So the testing is going to be stricter, and penalties on the teams are going to be a lot stricter and a lot more, a lot tighter parameters as well. Before, if you were caught having tires under pressure, you were able to just go back and we'll top them up a bit, don't worry. Where now I think it's going to be if we find tires under pressure, we're immediately letting the stewards know instead of giving you a chance to just pump them up some more.
I wonder what would even happen. Like, would they give them a start from the pit penalty? Like, it's gonna be weird to see, but yeah, good
It'll
to see
definitely
them.
be interesting to see if
Because like,
anybody breaks the new tire rules.
could you imagine somebody fucking loses their place because I don't know, Budzo left it out for like a half like psi under the limit? Like, oh, that would suck as a driver.
That would be awful. I'd be so mad at my pit crew.
Yeah. Um. Okay, I guess so. That was this season. What's happening? I want to talk briefly about what's happening next season. So I think we're probably going to do a whole episode. Oh, this is a good idea. We should write this down. But a whole episode about the regulations that are coming in place in 2022. So that's next F1
Yes.
regulations. They're changing up the sport. They want to keep it fresh. They want to make racing more entertaining, and so they're changing a lot about the rules on how a car can be designed and everything. And
Bringing back ground effect.
one of those big car change are the tires themselves. So I started the episode talking about on-sprung weight, and I guess we'll close the episode talking about on-sprung weight again, because the new tires that are coming in are pretty drastically different. Tires nowadays are 13-inch tires, meaning the rubber is
Or 13-inch rims.
yeah, exactly, like the wheels. That's the answer. It's 13-inch wheels. So there's a lot of rubber. Well, we're moving to 18-inch, so almost like a car size, like street car size rim, and the tires look really cool. I thought I was gonna hate it. I like big sidewalls. We just had that conversation, but they look really cool, and so that's just another aspect that of the rule regulation. They want to change how the cars look, and so those new tires should reduce weight. There's less tire, they're
Less
bigger
heavy
rims.
rubber there. Yeah.
Yeah, less, and so that's a big difference again. So we'll see how much impact it does next season, but there's just another step in the evolution of the F1 tire is this moving to 18-inch wheels, and yeah,
And
I'm
like
excited.
just
It looks good.
on the point of like the big sidewall tires, if you've ever watched a slow-mo top drag car taking off, they have massive tires, like huge chunks of rubber, and you can see that the wheels start to spin before the actual tire does, so it loads up and then springs out and gives you a better, faster, just straight launch. So that's sort of what the FIA is, I think, trying to move away from a little bit, is those tires having big spring in them. And then also the lower sidewall provides far more relevance to road tires, and they look a lot more like a tire you could put on your car and run normally.
Yeah, exactly. And that, well, at the end of the day, you got to think as well, like just their technology to quick change the tires in the pits, just make them so different from car tires. But yeah, I'm excited to see it. The biggest difference is that since tires are identical for every racing team, um, the design of the new 2022 cars for every team has to take into account those 18-inch tires, and they make a big difference compared to how the tires they've had for the last couple of years. And so there's only a limited amount of testing days. They don't have much data on how they perform. So that's just another, another item, another thing that can go wrong in designing a car for next season. So very excited to see which teams gets it right and which team just completely gets it wrong.
Yeah, it'll be very exciting to see. Hopefully there's a Mercedes blunder somewhere and we can get back to some type of remnants of a truly competitive Formula One season.
Yeah, and I think it kind of leads us to kind of our closing segment. Maybe we're going to share some opinions on what we think tires should look like in the future. So we just talked about 2022, so those are the regulations coming in, but let's think about changing the rules for in 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years. What could make it fun? So Wills, do you want to take it off? Do you want to start?
So I'll just start off with, I love tire wars. I think it's so much fun when you have multiple teams running on different tires. And I think it would be so cool to see, you know, these these manufacturers in Formula One somewhat go to like their domestic tire companies. So like see, Mercedes start running Continental tires because they're made in Germany. See, you know, like
Haas on some
Aust-
Goodyear.
Austin Martin Haas on some Goodyears, Austin Martin on Dunlops or Firestones. Like I think it would be so cool to see. I love the idea of tire wars. Now,
I
unfortunately, a lot of FIA series don't do tire wars. They've all sort of moved to sole tire manufacturers.
Yeah, I just think like nowadays as well, like tires, like well, just racing is just so expensive. And that's one of the big thing that the 2022 regulations are supposed to change is reducing the cost of racing. Like I can't see how in any way or form having all of those different manufacturers reduce the cost, right? Just a sole guy with like one development cost. Everybody just pays the exact same price. Like, can you imagine a poor team being stuck with like cheaper tires and just having another disadvantage? Like, to me, that sounds like just bad for tires. But at the same time, I'm thinking in my head, oh, well, just think about who can produce the most cost-effective tires or the most performant. I don't know. I'm split. I don't really see it coming back just because of what happened in 2005. Like, man, that's just a fiasco. It's hard to ever come back to.
Exactly. And like I mean, you can look at there are other series that still have um tire wars, like off-road racing still has a lot of those series have tire wars, and drifting. I find it pretty interesting. They have, I think there are
Oh
5
yeah,
tire suppliers that they can use,
yeah, because
but
every like
also
race car has their own like tire sponsor and stuff.
yeah, but
That's a
also
good point.
drift tires surprisingly are like performance road tires. It's just those cars have so much power and so much torque that they're able to use those tires differently. So the tires that are on, pro drift cars are regular road tires that you can then go to the store and buy.
Oh, that's actually interesting. I would have imagined like they should just go and take like some really used tire. Just go like every weekend to just show up to the city where the event goes. Just go into the like used and cheap pile and just put those on the back wheels. Like how funny would that be? Just empty the city of old tires.
That would be
Go through
pretty
every
funny.
store.
That's honestly, I thought too, like, oh man, like drift cars must use like the shittiest tires, but no, like they use top of the line performance road car tires. They just have so much torque that they
Yeah,
light those things up in a second.
I'm sure you probably just want the consistency of having, as always, the same fresh tires with the same like conditions, same way of degrading and everything. Is probably the reason why.
Yeah. Now, my big argument for bringing back the tire wars is just the publicity for the tire industry. I think,
Tires
if
are
they're able
boring. I agree.
if they're able to bring it back and like look, like we have the fastest tires in the world. We put our tires on the fastest car in the world and they still work perfectly. Like I don't know. I think that could only be good for the tire industry and only
That's a great
draw
point.
more attention to them.
I like that because I was on Reddit this week and I saw pictures from Baku where you see like the perfect frame of like Pirelli advertising behind like Verstappen kicking the exploded tire, and I was just like, oh man, so ironic, so funny.
Yeah.
Like seeing those or like the different tires, like yeah, definitely would be interesting. I like the idea of like you know competition brings innovation, so I would just be hoping like if ever that is a thing, I just want like a tire manufacturer to come with like a radical design and change the game, because that's probably what's going to make big change and make the sport keep you know uh
Keep
going on an
progressing and
evolution. Yeah,
getting
keep
faster and
progressing.
faster. Yeah.
Exactly.
What are
I,
what are
I
your
like that.
opinions? What are
Yeah,
your
I like
ideas
that. I have
for
some
tires
couple
in the future,
ideas.
Simon?
I kind of want to go on two different aspects. So first off, I think what would be really interesting is to have tires that wear out extremely fast. So think about the soft tires, but let's make them super soft. Like let's have like 5 pit stop a race. You know, like pit stops are always a great occasion for somebody to fuck up, to have a mistake, to do the strategy. Let's have so many pit stops that like the race is always like shambled up. You don't have a front runner for like 45 laps out of 46. Like, let's make the tires just wear out so quick that like anybody that gets a bit too cocky stays out 2 laps too long, bam, you're out. So I think that could be really interesting. Kind of going off of that, but maybe a different way would I think the 2018 rule with 7 tire compounds is a brilliant idea. I'm not sure why it didn't work out. Like I'd have to probably look at a couple races, see why. But imagine you have somebody who decides, okay, I'm not pitting this race, and then somebody that gets the super soft and just has laps so much faster that it becomes like a real race between the guy who doesn't pit once and the guy who's able to pit 4 times. I think that'd be great racing. You'd be so confused. And then all of a sudden, 2 laps before the end of the race, you'd be like, oh, this guy's just second place. Like, what? Yeah, I think it'd make it for interesting racing.
That did happen at like a Daytona 500 years and years and years ago. A guy won just because he managed to never pit. he figured he could go 500 miles on the same tires and the same tank of gas, and by gone, boy, I did it.
Look, if I don't pit, I don't crash, and I just keep going straight, I'll win, buddy.
Exactly. Boogity, 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 boys.
Oh, man, that's pretty funny. So I think probably that's what they had in mind when they introduced the 2018 rules. Like, just hopefully, like, tons of different strategic option. In the world we live nowadays, I imagine they would have data and analytics that makes it just so that they figure out, like, oh, this is the optimal like option, and there's not a better one. Like, this is it. And so just every team would race the same thing. But yeah, I think it could make it so that like, teams that have really crazy like good pit crews would have like an advantage to run like the super softs compared to a team who maybe don't want to put as much money into that, but put it into having a design to make their car last longer. I think it'd just be interesting to open up the strategies.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I definitely like your idea and have like a bigger disparity between each compound.
Yeah.
Like if it's a soft tire, like it is ridiculously soft. And if it's a hard tire, it is super duper hard. I definitely like that idea.
All right. So I guess we're in the closing phases. There's a rumor going around, Wills. What is it?
So we've talked a lot about how, Valtteri Bottas isn't really that fast, and maybe he doesn't really deserve his seat at Mercedes, and we both think that George Russell could definitely work wonders in that seat. Well, a Russian Formula One commentator, I've completely forgotten his name, but he got the scoop at Monaco that George has already signed a 2-year deal with Mercedes for next season.
No way. Man, I know Hamilton's not going to be happy about that. He's actually going to have competition.
So these are rumors, but I am excited for that potential. And I think it's something that is seen by most of the F1 world as almost inevitable. Like, I think everybody is expecting that to happen except for Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah, exactly. And I think since we're talking about this, like, one of the interesting part about F1 is how small of a grid it is. And so when we get into rumor mill season of who's going where, last season was really good about that. There was a lot of movement between teams, but already news are coming out. So we just talked about Russell. The news came out today that Esteban Ocon just signed 3 years for Alpine. I'm happy for the guy. 3 years. That's a long contract for a team that's been struggling.
especially for a driver who, Esteban's been in and out of, a racing seat in F1. I think that's great for him. He's definitely a talented driver, and it's amazing to see that he definitely has, it looks like a pretty forever home in Formula One there at Alpine.
it's pretty like it's huge props to Toto Wolff. You know, he's his manager. I don't know if that's the right term, but he's been sponsoring him. He's been making sure
Yeah,
to
Toto is his
giving him
manager.
like give him a seat and everything. Like, man, what a great like
What an
outcome
eye
for
for
him
talent.
for Esteban Ocon. Like, yeah, he's not stuck with him in his Mercedes seat, but at the same time, if he starts being very performant, I'm sure he can call him up and be like, hey, you know, come race for me soon. And
Yeah,
so yeah,
exactly.
very, very happy for Ocon. I remember like Drive to Survive. I think that was first season. That was one of their storyline, was that Ocon wasn't from a rich multi-billionaire family, and so you know, it was a struggle to get all the way to F1. Well, very happy for him to see him where he is now. I wonder if the amount has come out of how much money he's gonna make. Like, I have no clue. Like, F1 driver are like pretty well paid athlete, right? Most
But
of them
it's
are already
never
like millionaires. So like I don't
it's
imagine
never
they care that
disclosed
much.
how much they make.
Oh,
They
okay.
don't have to disclose in the contracts how much the drivers make because it's not related to the budget
Are
cap.
you telling me there's no cap limit? What?
There's no cap limit on how much drivers can get paid.
Man, that'd be crazy. Cap limits on who you can hire. Like,
I think
okay.
there is somewhat for like your engineers and like actual team members,
Yeah,
but
there's like,
as far as I'm aware,
yeah,
there's
they're
not
like,
a cap for drivers.
yeah, they're like development cost cap, but yeah, not for drivers.
Mhm.
Okay. So this wraps up our episode. I hope you enjoyed. I've never thought, if you told me I was gonna have a podcast a couple years ago or a couple months ago, never thought I would talk for like an hour and a half about tires. But we just did, Wills, and it was very interesting. I really enjoyed our conversation. Next week, actually, this weekend. So today we're the 16th of June. On the 18th, so in 2 days, starts the Grand Prix de France 2021. So the French Grand Prix at the Circuit Paul Ricard in France. And so free practice 1 starts on the 18th of June. Qualifying is going to start at 9 a.m. on the 19th, and then race 9 a.m. on the 20th of June. So,
and one of those days is Father's Day. Don't forget.
That's Sunday.
Sunday, the
yeah.
20th. Watch the race with your dad, everybody.
I like that. That's a good reminder. So hopefully we get a good race. I think we'll definitely talk a lot about it next podcast. That's the point of this podcast. But yeah, it's usually a disappointing race. Hopefully we all cure a hangover tomorrow on a Sunday and watching it. But let's hope for an interesting race. Yeah, that wraps it up for me. Thank you for listening. Wills, any last words?
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
All right.
Like,
thanks
comment,
again.
subscribe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.